The warmth of the small diner seemed to wrap around them, and for a brief moment the rest of the world felt distant. The chatter of the other customers, the soft clinking of dishes, and the faint hum of the diner's lights all faded into the background. Jake and Evelyn sat across from each other, their conversation flowing in a way that felt natural, despite the complexity of their feelings. There was a quiet understanding between them now, something that wasn't there before. The awkwardness had melted away, leaving only the raw honesty of their words. Evelyn took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She seemed lost in thought for a moment, her eyes downcast as though contemplating something important. Jake watched her, sensing that there was still more she wanted to say, more she needed to share. She had been holding on to something that had been weighing heavily on her for a long time. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want her to feel like she had to carry that burden alone anymore. After a moment of silence, Evelyn finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent so much of my life running, Jake. Running from people, from places, from my own decisions. I thought I could outrun the things I regret, the things that hurt me. But it doesn't work like that. Every time I thought I was getting away, I realized that I was just getting farther from who I really am." Jake listened carefully, his heart aching for her. He knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like you were always running from something. He'd done his fair share of it too. But he also knew that there came a point when you couldn't run anymore. You had to face what you were running from, no matter how hard it was. "I know what it's like," Jake said, his voice low and steady. "I've spent years working hard to avoid facing my own demons too. I've kept my head down, put in the long hours, and thought if I just kept working, if I just kept moving, I wouldn't have to deal with the things that weighed on me. But at some point you have to stop. You have to look around and decide if running is really the answer." Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to read his expression. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that made Jake's heart twist. It was the same vulnerability he had seen in himself, the fear of being seen for who you truly were, the fear of opening up and letting someone in. "Do you think it's possible to stop running?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I even know how to anymore." Jake reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. The touch was soft, comforting, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. There was an unspoken connection between them, something deeper than words. It was the kind of connection that made everything else feel irrelevant. The world outside the diner, the uncertainty of their pasts, it all faded away in that moment. "I think it's possible," Jake said, his voice calm and reassuring. "But it takes time. It takes trust. And sometimes it takes someone to help you realize that you don't have to face everything alone." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes softening, the walls she had carefully built around herself beginning to crumble. She had been so afraid of trusting someone, of letting someone in, but something about Jake made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let go of that fear. She didn't have to do everything on her own. She didn't have to carry the weight of her past by herself. Maybe I've been pushing people away for so long that I forgot what it felt like to trust," she admitted, her voice quiet but full of emotion. "I've been so scared of getting hurt again that I kept my distance from everyone. But I don't want to do that anymore. Not with you." Jake squeezed her hand gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to be afraid with me, Evelyn. You don't have to be perfect or have everything figured out. We all have our struggles, and sometimes all it takes is finding someone who will stand by you, even when you're not sure of yourself." Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was as if the weight she had been carrying for so long was slowly starting to lift, bit by bit. She had never let anyone in this way before. She had always kept people at arm's length, afraid of getting hurt or rejected. But sitting here with Jake, she felt something different. She felt accepted just as she was. She smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in a long while. "I don't know what happens next," she said softly. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of what's coming. I'm not scared of facing it, whatever it is." Jake smiled back, feeling the same sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held either, but for the first time he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't have everything figured out. But they had each other, and that was enough, for now. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. The past, with all its regrets and mistakes, didn't have to define them. They had the chance to move forward, to make new choices, and to build something better. And that was a chance worth taking. After a few moments, Evelyn stood up, her eyes meeting Jake's with a quiet determination. "You're right," she said softly. "It's time to stop running. And maybe it's time to see where this journey takes us, together." Jake stood up with her, a sense of certainty flooding through him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to let go of this moment, of this connection they had found. Together they could face whatever came next. As they left the diner, stepping out into the cool evening air, the world around them seemed to open up, full of possibilities. The train station was still there, the place where they had first met, but now it felt different. It wasn't just a place where they had crossed paths. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a place where their story was only just starting to unfold. Evelyn and Jake walked side by side, their steps in sync, their hearts lighter than they had been in a long time. There was still much they didn't know, but there was one thing they both understood now. No matter where life took them, they didn't have to face it alone. They had each other, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Jake's heart was racing as he approached the woman who had captured his attention from the moment their eyes had met at the train station. He hadn't expected to find her here, in this quiet little diner in the middle of nowhere. Yet there she was, standing in the doorway, looking like she belonged in a different world, just as she had before. Her presence felt surreal, like fate had brought her back to him for a reason. He took another step, his boots echoing in the small, quiet diner. The woman didn't see him at first. She seemed distracted, looking around the room, her eyes scanning the place like she was searching for something, someone. Maybe she was looking for a table or just waiting for the next step in her journey. Or maybe, just maybe, she was looking for him. The thought of her searching for him made Jake's chest tighten. He wasn't sure why, but the idea that their paths might have crossed for a second time, that he might not have been the only one thinking about the brief encounter, filled him with a strange sense of hope. He cleared his throat softly, trying to gather the courage to speak. She still hadn't noticed him, but the closer he got, the more certain he became that this was the right moment. He couldn't just stand back and wait for life to unfold any longer. He had to take action. "Excuse me," Jake said, his voice rough but steady. She turned around slowly, her gaze locking onto his just like before. For a second, neither of them said anything. They simply stood there, locked in a moment of recognition. The woman's expression flickered for a moment. There was surprise in her eyes, followed by a guarded look like she wasn't sure whether to be happy or confused. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't here to back down. "You," she started, her voice soft, hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you again." She looked around the diner for a moment, perhaps unsure if this was really happening, or if it was just some trick of her mind. Jake smiled, though it felt awkward. He wasn't used to standing in front of someone this way, his heart exposed, unsure of how to proceed. "I wasn't expecting to find you here either," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "But I'm glad I did." Her lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. You must think I'm strange for just walking away the way I did. I wasn't trying to be rude. It's just, sometimes I have to keep moving." Her voice trailed off as though there was more to say, but she wasn't sure how to explain it. She seemed to be battling something, though what exactly Jake couldn't tell. He could see it in her eyes. There was a story there, something deeper than what she was willing to show. She was guarded, holding something back, and for some reason that made Jake want to know more. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her, or maybe it was the mystery that seemed to surround her. But whatever it was, it made him even more determined to break through her walls. "You don't have to explain anything to me," Jake said gently. I had to find you. I couldn't stop thinking about you since that day at the train station. I don't know why, but it felt like we had unfinished business." His words came out faster than he expected, but he didn't regret them. He had to speak honestly, or he would regret not saying what was on his mind. The woman's expression softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a glimpse of vulnerability behind her guarded exterior. She lowered her gaze for a moment, her fingers brushing the edge of her coffee cup as if she were gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but there was a warmth in it that Jake hadn't heard before. I don't know why I left so quickly either, she said softly. I felt like I needed to go, like I had to keep moving. I didn't want to stay in one place too long. She hesitated before adding, but I guess deep down I was afraid. Afraid of staying? Afraid of letting someone in? Jake didn't know what to say to that. He could sense that there was more to her words than she was letting on. But he also knew that pushing her too hard would only make her pull away again. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his gaze meeting hers with a calmness he didn't quite feel inside. I get it, he said quietly. I'm not here to make you stay or try to change anything. I felt something that day. Something that didn't make sense, but it felt real. And I had to see if I could find you, if only to know why. She looked at him for a long moment, as if she were trying to decide whether to trust him with more of her story. Then finally she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but enough to let Jake know that she was willing to open up. Just a little. I'm Evelyn, she said softly, her voice quieter now. I'm not running from anyone. I'm running from myself, I guess. From all the choices I've made. From the life I thought I was supposed to have. I thought maybe if I kept moving, I could outrun everything that was weighing me down. She looked up at Jake, her eyes filled with a sadness that made Jake's heart ache. But it doesn't work that way, does it? You can't outrun your past. It always catches up with you. Jake's heart went out to her. He had never been in her shoes, never felt what she had felt, but he understood the desire to escape, to run from pain, from the weight of life's choices. He had done his share of running too, though his was mostly physical. Long hours on the ranch, keeping his head down and focusing on the work. But this was different. This wasn't just about running away. It was about trying to heal, trying to find peace in a world that didn't offer many answers. You don't have to run anymore, Jake said gently, his voice soft but steady. You don't have to face everything all at once. I don't know what's been weighing on you, but I know one thing for sure. You don't have to face it alone. Evelyn met his gaze then, and for the first time Jake saw a flicker of something more in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. He didn't know where their conversation would go or what would happen next, but for the first time he felt like they were on the same page. He wasn't sure what kind of future they had, but he knew they had to take it one step at a time. Maybe, Evelyn said quietly, maybe I can stop running for a while. She smiled softly, her eyes still full of that same sadness, but now there was something else, a small, quiet hope that hadn't been there before. Jake smiled back at her, feeling something shift between them. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time he felt like they could face it together. Jake stepped off the train, his boots making soft thuds against the wooden platform. The small town before him looked like something out of a postcard, quiet, peaceful, and surrounded by the beauty of nature. He could see the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks covered in snow, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the trees nearby. It was a place that seemed far removed from the busy city he had just left behind. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp mountain air. It was a far cry from the dust and heat of the Texas ranch, but Jake found himself appreciating the fresh, clean feeling that came with being in such a serene place. The noise and chaos of the city were long behind him, and for the first time in days he felt a little lighter, as if the weight of uncertainty had lifted just a bit. He wasn't sure exactly why he had come to this town. He had been following a feeling, a pull toward something that felt important, something that seemed to be connected to the woman he had met on the train platform. When he had bought the ticket and boarded the train, he hadn't known where it would lead him. He had simply known he couldn't stay behind, that something deep inside told him he had to keep going. Now here he was, standing in a small town with no clear plan or destination. But somehow it didn't feel like he was lost. It felt like the right place to be. Jake made his way into the town, his eyes scanning the faces of the people he passed. The town was small and the people seemed to know each other. There was a sense of familiarity in the air, like everyone belonged here. The quiet chatter of townsfolk greeting each other on the street made Jake feel like he was a stranger in a place where everyone else was at home. He found a small diner at the corner of the main street. The sign out front read Millie's Cafe. It wasn't much, just a simple building with a few tables inside and the smell of fresh coffee wafting out into the street. Jake hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should go in. He wasn't used to small towns, and he definitely wasn't used to feeling like an outsider. But the warmth coming from inside was inviting, and he figured it was as good a place as any to start asking around. Inside, the diner was cozy, with a few patrons scattered around at the tables. The walls were decorated with old photographs and vintage signs, giving the place a nostalgic feel. The waitress behind the counter smiled at him as he walked in. She had a welcoming expression, the kind that made you feel like you were welcome even if you'd never been there before. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly and warm. Jake nodded, pulling off his cowboy hat as he approached the counter. "I'm just passing through," he said, his voice a little rough from the travel. "I was hoping you might be able to help me. I'm looking for someone." The waitress raised an eyebrow, but she didn't seem startled by his request. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. Jake hesitated for a moment, trying to think of the right words. "She's a woman I met a while ago," he said slowly. "She might have come through here. I'm not sure, but she was headed west, and I thought maybe she passed through." The waitress didn't say anything for a moment, simply nodding as she poured him a cup of coffee. "A lot of people come and go through here," she said, "but I'll keep an eye out for her." "What's her name?" Jake paused. He realized for the first time that he didn't know her name. He had been so focused on the way she looked, on the way she made him feel, that he hadn't even thought to ask her. He had been so wrapped up in the moment that he hadn't thought about the practical things, the things that might help him find her again. "I'm not sure," he admitted, a little embarrassed. "I didn't catch her name, but she's got dark hair. And she was wearing a dress kind of like she didn't belong. She looked like someone who was running away or maybe just passing through." The waitress nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've got a story there," she said. "You wouldn't be the first person to come through here looking for someone. We get all kinds of travelers. But if she's here, I'll make sure to keep an eye out." Jake thanked her and took a seat by the window, watching the world go by as he sipped his coffee. He didn't expect much. After all, how could he? He had no idea if the woman he was searching for had even come through this town. He could have been chasing a shadow, a feeling that might have been nothing more than a fleeting memory. But something inside him told him to keep going. He had come this far and he wasn't going to stop now. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed a few people coming and going from the diner. There was an old man with a long white beard sitting alone at one of the booths, staring out the window with a far-off look in his eyes. A young couple came in next, laughing and holding hands as they made their way to a table near the back. The place had a charm to it, a quiet, easygoing charm that made Jake feel like he was in the right place, even if he wasn't sure why. The waitress came over after a few minutes, bringing him a fresh cup of coffee. "I've been asking around," she said with a smile. "Nobody here remembers seeing anyone who matches your description. But don't give up. People come and go, and sometimes it takes a while for word to spread." Jake nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment. He had hoped that the search would be easier, that he would walk into this small town and find the woman waiting for him, ready to explain everything. But life rarely worked that way, and Jake knew better than anyone that sometimes finding the answers you were looking for required patience and persistence. Just as Jake was about to pay for his coffee and leave, the door to the diner opened with a soft bell. Jake looked up instinctively, and for the briefest moment his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the doorway, was the woman he had been searching for. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she was wearing the same dress he remembered, the one that had caught his attention at the train station. She looked just as he remembered, distant yet graceful, like someone who didn't belong but didn't care. Jake stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He wasn't sure what to say or how to approach her, but he knew he couldn't let her slip away again. He took a deep breath, his hands slightly trembling as he walked toward her. This was the chance he had been searching for. It was now or never. For days after the brief encounter at the train station, Jake couldn't get the woman out of his mind. No matter what he did, no matter how busy his life got, her face kept appearing in his thoughts. Her eyes still holding the same quiet sadness. Her image seemed to float in his mind like a memory that hadn't yet been made. He had never been one for lingering thoughts about anyone, let alone a woman he had only met for a few moments. But this felt different. Something about that fleeting moment with her felt important, as though they had shared something that neither of them had realized at the time. Jake had tried to shake off the feeling. He was a cowboy. He wasn't supposed to dwell on feelings or thoughts of a woman he had barely spoken to. Life on the ranch had taught him to focus on what was in front of him, to work hard, and to keep moving forward. But no matter how much he tried to bury the thoughts, they kept resurfacing, like a quiet pull in the back of his mind. He kept thinking about her eyes. They had looked so lost, yet there was a strength there too, a kind of quiet confidence that made her stand out in the crowd. He wanted to know more about her, wanted to understand why she had seemed so distant and yet so full of life at the same time. Was she sad? Was she running away from something? Or was she simply passing through like him, just another traveler in the busy world? The more Jake thought about her, the more restless he became. He couldn't help but wonder where she had gone, what train she had boarded, and if he would ever cross paths with her again. The idea of leaving things as they were didn't sit well with him. He had always believed in taking chances in life, whether it was on the ranch or in relationships. If something felt worth pursuing, he went after it, no matter how difficult or risky it might seem. Jake knew that he couldn't just let the memory of her fade away. He had to find out who she was. He had to try. It wasn't easy, of course. Life on the ranch had kept him busy, and he didn't have much free time. But the thought of her was always there, nagging at him. He couldn't ignore it any longer. So one morning, after finishing his work early, Jake decided to take action. He wasn't sure exactly what he was looking for, but he knew that he couldn't just let this feeling of uncertainty hang over him any longer. He began asking around at the train station, hoping that someone might remember her. He wasn't sure how he could explain it to people. How could he describe a woman he barely knew, a woman he had only seen for a few moments? But he did his best, asking the station workers and anyone who might have seen her. At first it felt foolish. What was he even doing? But as the days passed, he found himself searching the station more and more. The search felt almost like a test of his own resolve. Would he give up? Or would he push on until he found what he was looking for? It was on the third day of his search that Jake finally got a break. One of the workers at the station remembered a woman matching her description. Dark hair, quiet demeanor, and a look of someone who had been lost in thought. She had asked about the next train to another city, and after a brief conversation she had left the station. But what struck Jake was that the worker mentioned something else, a piece of information that made his heart race with hope. The woman had left a note behind. The note wasn't for Jake, of course, but it was a clue that could help him find her. The worker explained that she had asked about trains heading west toward the mountains. Jake's pulse quickened. He didn't know exactly where she was going, but at least he now had a direction to follow. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for Jake, that was enough. Jake didn't hesitate. He bought a ticket for the next train headed in that direction, determined to see where it would lead him. His heart raced as the train began to move, the familiar sounds of the wheels on the tracks almost drowned out by the thoughts racing through his mind. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. All he knew was that he had to follow this feeling, this strange pull toward a woman he barely knew. He couldn't let it go, no matter how uncertain the journey ahead might be. As the train rumbled on, Jake found himself thinking more about what had drawn him to her in the first place. Was it simply her looks? He had to admit she was beautiful, but that wasn't it. There was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the way she had stood at the station, as if she was waiting for something he didn't understand. It wasn't just her appearance. It was the mystery that surrounded her, the unanswered questions that seemed to hang in the air. Why had she been so quiet? Why had she seemed so distant? And most importantly, why couldn't he shake the feeling that he was meant to find her? Jake thought about his own life, the simple, straightforward life of a cowboy on a ranch. His world had always been clear-cut. Work hard, take care of the land, and keep his head down. Relationships had come and gone, but none had ever made him feel this way. There had been women before, sure, but none who had made him question his purpose like this. None who had made him feel like he was being pulled in a direction he hadn't expected. The train sped on, and Jake's thoughts grew more focused. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, but he couldn't stop himself now. There was something about her, something that had made him want to take this chance. Even though he didn't know where it would lead, he had to know. He had to find out what was waiting for him, what was waiting for both of them. The train ride felt long, but Jake didn't mind. He was determined, and the further he traveled, the more he felt like he was moving toward something important. As the mountain slowly appeared on the horizon, Jake couldn't help but feel like he was getting closer, not just to her, but to something that had been missing in his life for a long time. Finally, the train came to a stop in a small town nestled in the mountains. Jake didn't know if this was where she had gone, but it felt like a sign. He stepped off the train, his boots hitting the platform with a soft thud, and looked around. The town was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the bustling city he had left behind. This was a place where people knew each other, where stories weren't lost in the crowd. Jake didn't know what would happen next, but he was ready to find out. He knew that the journey wasn't over, that this was just the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, this was where his story with the woman from the train station would truly begin. It was an ordinary day in the city, but for Jake Carson, nothing felt ordinary at all. The tall buildings, the crowded streets, and the rush of strangers, everything seemed so unfamiliar. He had spent most of his life on a ranch in the small, quiet town of Cedar Ridge, Texas, a cowboy through and through. He was more comfortable with the open skies and wide open spaces than with the busy streets of the city. But today he found himself waiting at the train station in the heart of this bustling place, feeling more out of place than he had ever felt. Jake had just finished a long stretch of work on the ranch and had decided to visit his family. His brother had invited him to the city, and although Jake wasn't thrilled about it, he decided to make the trip. His boots felt heavier on the city pavement, and the noise of honking cars and chattering people grated on his nerves. All Jake wanted was a quiet ride back home, but first he had to wait for his next train. He sat on a bench, his eyes scanning the crowd of people walking by, each one in their own world, rushing somewhere. Jake wasn't in a hurry. In fact, he wasn't sure where the next few hours would take him, and that was fine with him. His gaze wandered over the platform, taking in the movement, the people, the sounds of trains arriving and leaving. As his eyes moved across the crowd, he suddenly stopped. His heart skipped a beat as he saw her. She was standing near the far end of the platform, just a few yards away, looking down the tracks. She seemed out of place, like she wasn't supposed to be there, just like Jake. But unlike him, she looked calm and composed, like the noise of the city didn't affect her. She had a quiet confidence that made her stand out among the crowd of hurried commuters. Her long, dark hair flowed gently with the breeze, and she had a look of both curiosity and sadness in her eyes, as if she was waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Jake couldn't help but stare. It wasn't like him to notice someone so intensely, but there was something about her that pulled him in. She didn't belong to the city. She seemed to carry a story with her, a mystery that Jake couldn't help but want to know more about. The way she looked around, her eyes darting between the people rushing by, made Jake wonder if she was waiting for something specific, or maybe she was lost just like him. He quickly looked away, feeling a little embarrassed. What was he doing? He didn't know anything about this woman. She was just another face in the crowd. But as he looked back, their eyes met. Just for a moment. It wasn't a long stare, but in that brief second, something changed. It was like a spark, a connection that neither of them had expected. He felt an overwhelming urge to get up and speak to her, to find out who she was and why she looked so lonely standing there in the middle of all the noise. But before he could act on that impulse, the loud sound of the train's whistle broke through the air. Jake watched as the train pulled into the station, its wheels screeching as it came to a stop. The woman didn't move at first, still standing there looking down at the tracks. She seemed to be lost in thought, unaware of the crowd that was now gathering to board the train. Jake stood up, his hand gripping the edge of the bench as he watched her closely. This was his chance. The train was about to leave, and if he didn't do something now, he might never see her again. But the moment passed. She finally turned around, just as the doors to the train opened, and she stepped toward it. Without looking back, she walked up the steps, her head slightly down as if she was lost in her own world, ready to disappear into the crowd. Jake's heart sank. He hadn't even moved, and now she was gone. The doors closed with a final hiss, and the train slowly began to pull away from the station. Jake stood there, staring at the train, feeling like he had missed something important. It wasn't like him to feel this way, but there was a nagging feeling inside, a voice that told him he had just let an opportunity slip away. The woman on the platform had left, and with her, the chance to connect with someone that seemed so familiar, even though they had never spoken a word to each other. As the train disappeared into the distance, Jake's thoughts started to settle. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. He had never been one for chasing after people, and maybe the same rule applied here. If it was important, he would see her again. Life had a way of working things out, right? But even as he tried to convince himself of this, the image of her face lingered in his mind. Jake sighed and sat back down on the bench, his eyes scanning the station once again, but this time, he wasn't looking at the people rushing by. He was thinking about her, the way she had stood there, calm and poised, as if waiting for something. Something had drawn him to her in that brief moment, and though the train had taken her away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. He didn't know what it was, but it felt like the beginning of something. The train station grew quieter as the day wore on, and Jake's mind began to wander. Was he foolish to feel so strongly about someone he had barely met? He wasn't sure. He had always prided himself on being a man of action, someone who could make decisions without second-guessing himself. But this felt different. It wasn't just about making a move. It was about something deeper, something that connected him to this woman in a way that was hard to explain. By the time the next train arrived, Jake had almost forgotten about the woman. Almost. But the memory of their brief connection still lingered in the back of his mind. As the train left the station and the crowd began to disperse, Jake stood up. Maybe he would catch the next one and head back to his family. Maybe he would forget about the city, the noise, and the woman on the platform. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't forget her. Not yet. And so, Jake waited, unsure of what was next, but with a quiet hope that somehow, fate would lead him back to the woman who had captured his attention, even if only for a fleeting moment.